Imagine walking into the throne room of the most powerful man in your nation, a man who has just committed murder, pointing your finger at him and saying, "You are the man," and surviving. That's exactly what the prophet Nathan did to King David. In ancient Israel, there was one figure who could stand toe-to-toe with the king and live to tell about it, the prophet. To understand how prophets became the great challengers of kings, we need to go back to the beginning, to the moment prophecy and kingship were born together. In ancient Israel, the king held a sacred title, the anointed one of Yahweh, in Hebrew mashiach, the word that gives us Messiah, and the prophet performed that anointing. Take Saul, Israel's first king. The prophet Samuel anointed him, and then something extraordinary happened. Saul encountered a band of ecstatic musicians, harp, tambourine, flute, lyre, and the spirit of Yahweh seized him. He entered a prophetic frenzy and was transformed, the text says, into another man. David too was anointed by a prophet and received Yahweh's spirit. Prophecy and kingship were born intertwined. After David, something shifts. Kings no longer prophesy themselves, but the prophetic connection doesn't weaken. It transforms. Prophets don't just anoint kings, they announce their downfall. The same institution that placed the crown on the king's head could rip it away. Samuel anointed Saul, then told him God had rejected him. Nathan blessed David's dynasty, then condemned David to his face. This dual role, kingmaker and kingbreaker, is a remarkable feature of Israelite religion. In Egypt, the pharaoh was a god. In Mesopotamia, the king was the god's chosen regent, rarely challenged by priests. In Israel, the prophet stood as a permanent built-in check on royal power. No other ancient culture had anything quite like it, and this opposition wasn't occasional, it was systematic. Look at the pattern. Samuel confronted Saul, Nathan confronted David, Elijah confronted Ahab, Micaiah confronted Ahab, Elisha opposed the entire house of Ahab, Jeremiah opposed the king of Judah, pair after pair after pair. The biblical books of Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, collectively called the former prophets, weave this adversarial relationship into the fabric of the narrative. There's even a literary formula that repeats throughout. The word of the Lord came to prophet X against King Y. And this is not a collection of isolated incidents. It's a defining structural pattern of the entire monarchy. Every king had his prophetic adversary. The biblical writers wanted readers to see this clearly, and the prophet is the permanent counterweight to royal power. But what did this opposition look like in practice? Two stories bring it to life more vividly than any others. The first story, Nathan and David. It begins with a crime. King David, from his rooftop, sees Bathsheba, the wife of one of his soldiers, Uriah the Hittite. David takes her. She becomes pregnant. Now David needs to cover his tracks. He summons Uriah home from the battlefield, hoping Uriah will sleep with his wife and assume the child is his. But Uriah refuses to go home. He sleeps at the palace gate. His reason: the ark and Israel and the Judah dwell in tents, and my lord Joab and the servants of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I go to my house? Uriah's loyalty is an implicit rebuke of the king. A common soldier shows more honor than the king of Israel. So David resorts to murder. He sends Uriah back to the front with sealed orders to his commander: place Uriah in the fiercest fighting, then pull back and let him die. It works. Uriah is killed. David marries Bathsheba. Case closed, or so he thinks. Then Nathan arrives. He doesn't accuse David directly. Instead, he tells a parable. A rich man with enormous flocks steals a poor man's one beloved ewe lamb, a lamb that ate from his hand, drank from his cup, slept in his arms, and slaughters it to feed a guest. David erupts in fury. The man who did this deserves to die. And Nathan delivers the most devastating line in the Hebrew Bible: that man is you. David, trapped by his own moral judgment, can only say, I have sinned against the Lord. Notice what happens next and what doesn't. Nathan survives, no execution, no exile. The prophet walks out alive. David repents, but consequences still follow. The child dies, and violence will haunt David's household for generations. The king is not above God's law. The second story echoes the first. King Ahab covets a vineyard belonging to a man named Naboth. Naboth refuses to sell. It's his ancestral inheritance. Ahab sulks. His wife Jezebel takes matters into her own hands. She orchestrates a show trial. 2 false witnesses accuse Naboth of cursing God and the king. Naboth is executed. The vineyard transfers to the crown. Royal power, unchecked, crushes an innocent man. Then Elijah appears. He meets Ahab in the stolen vineyard and pronounces doom on the king and his entire dynasty. Ahab tears his clothes and repents. God delays the punishment, but does not cancel it. Ahab later dies in battle at Ramoth Gilead. Nathan and Elijah are the most famous examples, but this pattern, prophet confronting king, runs through the entire biblical narrative, and it has enormous consequences for what comes next. From the royal perspective, prophets were troublemakers. Ahab's own words to Elijah, "Is that you, you troubler of Israel?" King saw prophets as destabilizers, threats to order. But the biblical narrators saw it differently. The prophets were essential. They represented a principle that no human power is absolute. The king might command armies, levy taxes, and build palaces, but he could not silence the voice that spoke for God. The prophet functioned as God's watchdog, the moral conscience that power could not buy, intimidate, or kill. This adversarial pattern is the foundation for understanding the classical prophets, the later figures whose oracles were collected into books: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Amos, Hosea, Micaiah. These are sometimes called the literary or writing prophets. Their writings are very often given in direct opposition to official royal policy. When you read their oracles of judgment, you're hearing the same voice that Nathan used against David and Elijah used against Ahab, now amplified, expanded, and preserved in writing. The biblical tradition insists that power must always answer to something beyond itself. The prophets were that something, God's voice speaking truth to power, no matter the cost. In ancient Israel, no crown was above the word of the Lord.